second speaker this morning is Pranita Ramesan from the University of Southern California at San Diego, and she will speak about non-local games involving quantum groups.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you very much for organizing this. I learned a lot over the past few weeks, and I had interactions with many wonderful people, so thank you very much for putting this together. And today I'm talking about non-local games involving quantum graphs. And if you were here earlier, last week or the week before, you probably heard a lot of talks on quantum graphs already. So I apologize if this is just repetitive for some of you here. Okay, so we start with how do we generalize a classical graph using operator algebraic objects. So let's say we have a classical graph on 3 vertices. So the vertex set is 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to assume that my graph is reflexive and undirected. So the edges are given by some tuples, which are unordered pairs. And the structure of the graph can be represented using an adjacency matrix, which has entries 0s and 1s, where the positions of the 1s represent an edge on the graph, and 0s represent a non-edge. So this is the actual graph, and this is the adjacency matrix associated with this graph. So now one way of generalizing this adjacency matrix is to replace the 0s and 1s by other complex valued numbers. So you allow the 1s to take other values and possibly different, so not necessarily just 1s, but like complex valued numbers, and the stars could be all different. So in this way, you get another matrix from the graph, but now this is no longer sufficient to give you all the structure about the graph, but instead a collection of such matrices that have the same skeleton as the adjacency matrix would recover the same information as the adjacency matrix. So if any matrix in this collection has a non-zero entry in a certain position, then you know that those two vertices in the graph were adjacent. So in this way, you can start with a classical graph and then associate a collection of matrices that have the same skeleton as the adjacency matrix. And now this collection has some nice properties. So an alternate way of writing this same set is that it is the span of these matrix units, where these indices I and j represent vertices on the graph that are connected by an edge or by a loop. And so this set has some nice properties. First of all, it's going to be an operator system in this matrix algebra of 3 cross 3 matrices. And by that I mean that it's a linear subspace, and it's going to be closed under adjoint because I assumed that the graph was undirected to begin with. And then it contains the identity matrix because the graph was reflexive. So this is one key property that this collection possesses. And then the other main property is that it has a bimodule structure. And this is with respect to the diagonal matrices. So by a bimodule, I mean that if you take a diagonal matrix on the left and another diagonal matrix on the right, and then that multiplication would be absorbed into this collection again. And so this is precisely the key structure of a quantum graph, that it has some kind of an operator system that has a bimodule property. So this is the prototypical example of a quantum graph, namely a graph operator system which arises from a classical graph. But more generally, you can define operator systems with a similar property, possibly over different algebras, and that will give you different versions of, or different kinds of quantum graphs. And so one motivation for studying quantum graphs comes from quantum information theory, and that is particularly associated with the confusibility graph of noisy classical channels. So let's say you have a noisy classical communication channel. So there are some input messages or input alphabets, x's, x1 to xm, and there are some output alphabets, y1 to ym. This is a noisy communication channel, and by that I mean that there is a probability transition matrix associated with this channel. And with the channel, you can associate a classical graph, which is called its confusibility graph. So the vertices of this graph are basically the input messages that are being transmitted through the channel, and two vertices on this graph are connected by an edge if they may be confused upon transmission. And by that I mean that there is a non-zero probability that both of these inputs may be received as the same output y. So this graph models the noise that arises in this communication channel, and the graph operator system, as introduced on the previous slide, can be associated to this channel phi. So I'll call S phi to be the confusability graph associated with the channel phi. So what quantum graphs do is that they generalize this idea when you replace classical communication channels by quantum communication channels. So by a quantum channel, I mathematically mean that it's a completely positive and trace preserving linear map. And so if you begin with a quantum channel, which has a certain Krauss representation because it's completely positive, then you can associate a certain operator system to this quantum channel, which is defined as follows. It's the span of the product of these matrices, which are basically these Krauss operators in this representation. And if this phi was a classical channel to begin with, then you would recover precisely the graph operator system of the confusability graph of the channel. So in this sense, this notion here generalizes the idea of a confusability graph of a classical channel. And more is there, which is that every matrix quantum graph arises from a quantum channel. So by that I mean that if you begin with any operator system in this matrix algebra Mn, then you can find a quantum channel for which this operator system is going to be its quantum confusability graph. Okay, so this is the quantum information theoretic side of quantum graphs, but then there is a lot of mathematical interest and there are different definitions of quantum graphs in the literature. So here are some main ways to probably categorize them. So the idea is as follows. If you have a classical graph G, then there are three different things that you can quantize, or like look at the non-commutative versions of those objects. So if you quantize the confusability graph associated to classical channels, you get a certain definition, which is precisely that of matrix quantum graphs and the operator systems that we saw earlier. The other way is to look at the edge set of a classical graph and quantize the edge set. So this idea was used by Nick Weaver in his study of quantum relations on a quantum set. And then there's yet another way which uses a categorical theory of quantum sets and quantum functions. So you look at a non-commutative analog of a finite set, and that is given by a C-star algebra with some properties, and it's a quantum set. And then you can talk about certain functions on this set. And if you look at a graph, it's basically a structure on a given set. And this structure is given by a certain operator, namely the adjacency matrix. So the same idea is used here where you have a quantum set and then you associate an operator with it known as the adjacency or the quantum adjacency operator, and then that gives you a different version of quantum graphs. And the way that these pictures are connected is through certain projections that you can associate with each of these definitions. So in the first case, you can look at the orthogonal projection onto the operator system. In the second case, you can look at a projection which is a non-commutative version of this characteristic function on the edge set. And in the third case, you can associate a certain projection with the quantum adjacency operator, namely the Choi matrix of this operator. And then under appropriate identification, one can show that all of these projections have the same range, and that is this underlying operator system that we started with. Okay, so here are the actual definitions. And I'm going to go through like 3 or 4 definitions and show how they are related, because at the end I'll talk about 3 or 4 definitions of quantum homomorphisms which use all of these different definitions. So let's start with the quantum relations perspective. So in this case, a quantum graph has 2 main objects. One is the quantum set. So this plays the non-commutative analog of the vertex set. So this is given by a finite dimensional von Neumann algebra. So throughout my talk, everything is finite dimensional. And then the graph structure itself is given by an operator system that lives in this V of H, where M is represented. And this operator system has a bimodule property with respect to the commutant of M. So some examples that we have already seen fit into this paradigm. So namely the graph operator system. If you begin with a classical graph, then you can think of the vertex set to be this diagonal algebra, And then the commutant of this quantum set is going to be the diagonal algebra itself. And in this case, the graph operator system of this classical graph will satisfy this definition, and therefore it's a quantum graph. The second one is the matrix quantum graph, which is the one that we also saw in the case of non-commutative confusability graphs. So here, the quantum set is the full matrix algebra, and the commutant in this representation is just scalar multiples of the identity. And therefore, every operator system will be a bimodule with respect to this commutant. So in this case, you see that any operator system is going to give you a quantum graph structure on this quantum set. Okay, the other version is that of skew-symmetric operator spaces. So this is very similar to what we saw earlier, but now this has been vectorized. And this is the irreflexive case in the sense that instead of looking at an operator system where you have the identity, you're looking at the version where you don't have loops on the graph. So you have the orthogonal version of that. So first of all, here the space itself is vectorized, so it's viewed as a subspace of H tensor H, which is playing the role of my vertex spaces. And then it satisfies two properties. So the first one captures the irreflexivity, and this basically means that when you take the inner product with the maximally entangled state, you get 0 for every element of this space. And the other version is the symmetry part, so namely that the graph is undirected. So if you swap any element of this, any element of S, the tensor product swap, then you get back the same collection. So this is another way of talking about irreflexive quantum graphs. And then with yet another identification where you can view this H tensor H as like operators from the dual space to H, you get an equivalent definition, which you might have encountered as twisted operator anti-system. So again here, it's the exact same definition, but now you are making an identification through this theta map that gives you correspondence between H tensor H and then these bounded operators from the dual to H. So an element here or a subspace in this space is called a twisted anti-operator system if it satisfies two conditions, and these two conditions are precisely the same conditions as above. This captures the irreflexivity of the graph, and then the other one captures the symmetry or the undirectedness of the graph. Okay, so now coming to the third definition, so this is viewing a quantum graph as a projection. So if you begin with a classical set, X, or like you can define, or let's say you begin with a classical graph G which has a vertex set V. So then the edges may be viewed as subspaces or like subsets of V cross V, and so you can look at the associated function spaces of these. So basically you capture the edge structure by functions on V cross V, and so you get the edge space being captured by the associated characteristic function on the edge set. And this characteristic function has some natural properties, such as that it is idempotent, and it's going to be invariant under the flip. And then the product of these tensor components of, if you decompose it into a tensor product, will give you the identity, which means that the graph would be reflexive. So all of those properties can be generalized to a non-commutative setting as follows. So a quantum graph is a quantum set. So first of all, you fix a version of the vertex set, and then you define an operator or like a projection which lives in this set M tensor M of. So you can think of this as the characteristic function on like C of V tensor C of V. And so it satisfies these properties, namely it is a projection, and then if you multiply the two components of the tensor, it gives you the unit, and then if you swap the components of the tensor product, then you get back the same element. Okay, and then this is very closely related to this last definition that I'm presenting here, which is that of a quantum adjacency operator. So in this case, a quantum graph has, again, two structures. First of all, it has a quantum set, and this quantum set is a C-star algebra to begin with, but we also want to view it as a Hilbert space, so you fix a certain state on it, and in particular, I'll assume that this state is faithful and tracial. And then, with respect to this state, you have an associated GNS Hilbert space, which can be identified with the original M. So now you have both a C-star algebra structure and a Hilbert space structure on your quantum set. And then you can define a linear operator on that Hilbert space. So here, M may be interpreted as a Hilbert space, which is like the GNS Hilbert space associated with psi. And then you can impose certain properties on this operator. So classically, if you look at the adjacency matrix of a graph, it has zeros and ones as its entries. So that means that if you take the Schur product of that matrix with itself, that is, you multiply it pointwise, then you get back the same matrix. So this is the non-commutative version of the Schur product. And then if you want to define the graph to be reflexive, then that would mean that the adjacency matrix has ones along the diagonal. So one way of phrasing that is that if you take the Schur product of the adjacency matrix with the identity matrix, then you get back the identity matrix. So that's this condition here. And then the last one is symmetry, which translates to A being A transpose. So this means that the graph is undirected, and this operation here translates to the transpose of A in the non-commutative setting. And so here, M, M star, these are multiplication maps, and they're adjoint with respect to this Hilbert space structure, and eta is the unit map on M. Okay, so a quick way to see these connections is as follows. So there are two main perspectives. One is viewing a quantum graph as some operator space with some bimodule property, and the other is thinking of an operator defined on a quantum set. So in the first case, the operator space is denoted by S, and in the second case, this linear operator is, let's say, denoted by A, which stands for the quantum adjacency matrix. The first perspective represents the fact that you're quantizing the edges of the graph, and the second one is quantizing the adjacency matrix of a classical graph. And in both cases, you have certain projections. So in this case, you can look at the orthogonal projection onto this operator space. And in the second case, you can associate the Choi matrix of A. So the Choi matrix of A is, if you think of A as just an operator, then there are basically two matrices that you can naturally associate with it. So one is just the standard matrix representation of the operator, and the other is the Choi matrix of that operator. And it's basically just a rearrangement of shuffling of entries between these two matrices. So here A is basically the matrix representation of an adjacency operator, and P is the Choi matrix of that operator. And so there is a very natural correspondence between P and A. And then you can associate or go back and forth between these two definitions using a correspondence between this projection and this projection. So you can view elements here as operators on P of L2 of M under this well-known isomorphism, and therefore you get a way to go back and forth between these two perspectives. But one thing to note is that this correspondence is not bijective. So if you have an operator system, then you can have many projections that have that with range S, and so with all those projections you get an adjacency operator associated to it. So a quantum graph S might be associated with many adjacency matrices. So it's not a one-to-one correspondence, but in particular, if you impose more properties on this adjacency operator, like it's, let's say, it's star preserving, or it's self-adjoint, it's self-conjugate, and so on, then it ends up being unique, and so you can talk about one unique adjacency matrix associated with a quantum graph S. So here is a summary of how you can translate the properties in these different perspectives, one as an operator space, one as a projection, and one as an adjacency matrix. And then this is the matrix quantum graph that appears in quantum information theory. So, all right. So I wish I had another table like that at the end of my talk, but it did not fit on the slides. So I'm going to just like mimic the same thing where you can define a homomorphism for quantum graphs in each of these perspectives, and they arise in different contexts. Okay, so starting with graph homomorphism. So when you have two classical graphs, G and G2, G1 and G2, then a homomorphism basically is a mapping on the vertices of the graphs such that it respects the adjacency structure of the graph. Now there is a version of there is an entanglement-assisted version of homomorphism, which is typically called quantum homomorphism, and this arises in the context of non-local games. So in a non-local game, there are two parties who are cooperatively trying to convince a verifier about something by answering questions posed by the referee. And they do this without communication with each other, but possibly by employing a strategy between them. And so there is a well-known game known as the non-local graph homomorphism game, and the winning quantum strategies for that game lead to a notion of quantum homomorphism between the graphs. So here is the classical version of the non-local graph homomorphism game. So basically there are two classical graphs, G1 and G2. And the way the game works is that the referee randomly selects questions from one of the graph, which is vertices from the graph, and then sends it to the players individually, Alice and Bob. And then the players have to respond with the homomorphic image of those vertices from the other graph. So the outputs of this game come from the second graph. And then there is a rule function which determines whether the responses given by the players is a valid response or not. And this basically boils down to two conditions which come from this homomorphism property of the game. So namely, that if the inputs of the players were adjacent, then the outputs of the players must be adjacent in the other graph. And then there is a synchronicity condition, which means that there should be agreement in the players' responses. So if the players receive the same questions as their inputs, then they must necessarily give the same outputs. The players may employ different strategies to win this game. They are not allowed to communicate directly with one another during the game, which means that they do not know each other's questions and answers. However, they might agree upon a strategy before the game begins. And in particular, this could involve using some kind of quantum measurements on an entangled system. And so quantum strategies for this game are mathematically given by this framework. So there is the players share an entangled quantum state. And then they make some measurements on their systems. And then they use the outcomes of these measurements to decide their responses for the game. So basically there is a resource space. So I'm going to restrict myself to the finite dimensional tensor product framework for this talk. So basically there is an underlying resource space which is given by some HA tensor HP, where these are finite dimensional Hilbert spaces. And then there is a unit vector living in this space, which is possibly an entangled state that the players share. And then each of the players have a measurement system. So corresponding to each input that they receive, they make a measurement, and this is given by positive operator valued measures. So that means these are positive operators that add up to the identity. And then the joint behavior of the players is given by this condition. So probability that the players respond with A and B given X and Y is given by this formula. And so there are different mathematical models that one could use for these quantum strategies, and in particular, this is the finite dimensional tensor product model. And so if there is a winning quantum strategy for this graph homomorphism game, then we say that there exists a quantum homomorphism between G to H. Okay, so now how do we generalize this idea of homomorphisms to quantum graphs? So first of all, there are some natural definitions without thinking of entanglement. And so here is an incomplete list. So if you're just thinking about these quantum graphs as operator systems, then within the category of operator systems, you can talk about morphisms, and that will be just like unital complete order isomorphisms that would like preserve the structure of the two graphs back and forth. So this is one way. And then Stahlke introduced another version of homomorphisms, which are probably more suitable to this quantum confusability graph perspective. So this basically says that the Krauss operators together take one of this operator space into the other. So that is one perspective. The third one uses this language of quantum functions. So the quantum graph is viewed as a structure which has a quantum set and an operator. So basically you can define a function between these quantum sets that respects the quantum adjacency operator. So that gives you a notion of quantum homomorphisms there. And then in the framework of quantum relations, Weaver has another definition which is called push forward or pull back of these operator spaces. So these are some candidates for homomorphisms that we already have. And then there are more which come from non-local games. So there are different kinds of non-local games that have been defined for quantum graphs. And in particular, you can have a homomorphism from a classical graph to a quantum graph to a quantum graph, or quantum to classical, and so forth. And even within those categories, now you can say which model of quantum graphs do you want to use, the operator system one, or the skew symmetric space one, or the one with adjacency matrices, and so on. So like these 4 games actually use different models, and so it's not very easy to maybe directly see the correspondence between these different games or their associated strategies. Okay, so first let me start with like Stahl case definition. So here you have 2 trace-free matrix quantum graphs. So basically these are some reflexive, irreflexive setting matrix quantum graphs. And so we say that there is a classical homomorphism from S to T if there is a quantum channel with, let's say, some Krauss representation such that this operation, or like this sort of conjugation, conjugation by these Krauss operators takes one of these spaces into the other one. So this kind of captures the idea that the adjacency in the first graph is carried forward to the second one. And now you can quantize this by allowing some resource space or entanglement with a resource space. So we say that there's a quantum homomorphism from S to T if you also have a resource space, so it's some finite dimensional von Neumann algebra, and then you fix a certain state as needed, such that there is a quantum channel now on this bigger space, and it still has the same property, that now the conjugation, but now on this more, the entangled system carries one to the other. So this is a quantum version of the same classical homomorphism. And all the definitions of these non-local games basically at least coincide with these 2 in the appropriate, under appropriate identification. They may not agree with one another, but at least all of them agree with this. So that's one point. Okay, so okay, right. So let's say we begin with 2 quantum graphs. So here I'm going to assume that there is an underlying set M, and then there is a fixed faithful tracial state on M, there is an adjacency operator A, and then there is an associated operator space S. So this entire system represents one quantum graph. So in the first, let's say the first non-local game of like classical to quantum version, the game is defined using the skew symmetric operator spaces model of quantum graphs. So in this scenario, the inputs come from a classical graph and the outputs come from a quantum graph, but this quantum graph is now viewed as, it is vectorized. So there are like 2 components of it that are given by Alice and Bob as their responses. And basically in this scenario, if you think about the player's strategy, then it comes from certain operators like which live in this space. So D of X is the diagonal algebra, and it basically represents the operator space corresponding to the classical graph. And then this represents the operator space corresponding, not the operator space, but then the quantum vertex set associated to the quantum graph. And this is where the operators on this resource space come from. And in the second case, quantum to classical homomorphisms, we look at traceless self-adjoint operator spaces. In a way, these 2 are the same, but this game is still different from the other because in the first case, you take an entire vertex and give it to one player as their input. But in the second model, what happens is that you take one quantum vertex, so think of it as an element in this MX, and then you vectorize it, so you break it apart into, you break one vertex, quantum vertex, into 2 components and send part of it to Alice and part of it to Bob. And then the players have to respond with 2 separate outputs. So these 2 are already quite different in the sense that here the players get an entire vertex to themselves, whereas here the players don't get an entire vertex to themselves as their inputs for the game. And in this case, now you have certain operators, and these are projection valued measures that live in a space like this. So here the outputs are classical, so therefore this algebra is going to be commutative, whereas the input space is going to be quantum. Okay, in this third scenario, this is a quantum homomorphism game from quantum graphs to quantum graphs. And here the inputs and outputs basically come from projection lattices on like mx tensor mx and my tensor my. And here there is like basically this is a quantum input output game, and there is a synchronous so this homomorphism game naturally has a synchronous condition that if the players get the same inputs, then they must respond with the same output. So in this case, the synchronicity is basically modeled by something else, which is called as concurrency. So it basically states that the maximally entangled state received as input must go to a maximally entangled state as output, which seems very natural. But because of that, it is a slightly more general scenario than what you would expect in synchronicity. And in this last case, you have another version of a quantum input-output game, but this is modeled using adjacency matrices in the sense that the winning conditions for the game are now stated in terms of some relation satisfied by the adjacency matrices or like the associated Choi matrices with this adjacency matrix. And the strategy for these games come from quantum functions in the homomorphism case, and they come from quantum bijections in the isomorphism game. So it's not very easy to compare these different game setups because they have different input spaces and output spaces in the sense that these are different models of the quantum graph. However, one easy way to identify all of these is that all their strategies basically live in mx tensor my tensor b of h, and depending on the winning conditions, they satisfy certain properties. So in particular, if you have something like a synchronous condition, then you might get a star homomorphism, whereas if you have a concurrency condition, then you might get a UCP map. So sometimes one is a special case of the other, but sometimes it's not. So I'll maybe state one particular version of quantum graph homomorphism game, which I have. So in this case, we have a fixed quantum graph with an operator space S and a quantum set M, like represented in Mn. And then the outputs of this game are going to come from a classical graph G and C vertices. And so we say that there is a classical homomorphism from G to G if there is a projection valued measure such that this property is satisfied. And so this basically comes from this winning strategy for a certain game that we define between quantum graphs to classical graphs. So the inputs of this game are basically elements of M that have been vectorized and sent, part of it has been sent to Alice and part of it has been sent to Bob. And then there are two conditions. The adjacency is captured by the fact that if these, or if the quantum input belongs to a certain basis, a well-chosen basis for this operator space, then it must satisfy a certain property. And if it belongs to the commutant, which is the synchronous version of it, then it should satisfy a certain property. So there are two winning conditions, and by studying the winning strategies of that game, you can exactly get a characterization like this, that the classical homomorphism between G to G exists precisely when you have a PVM satisfying this. And similarly, you get a quantum homomorphism in this game if there exists a resource space N, and then there is a state and a trace on it, and a projection valued measure such that now these operations are equal to 0 whenever there is a non-adjacency for whenever there is a non-adjacency in the other graph. And it can be shown that those winning strategies which arise from the quantum to classical game precisely coincide with the initial style case definition that I showed. So basically we have this identification and then we can actually show that there is a quantum channel from this space M, tensor n star. So this is representing the resource space where the players are making the measurements. And this channel is basically capturing the homomorphism itself. And the Krauss operators of this channel basically take one of the operator spaces into the other. So the classical, the quantum graph's operator space to the classical graph operator space. And then there are two paths to it based on the synchronicity condition. And then this is exactly equivalent to the previous definition that I had. So one is Stalky's homomorphisms, and the other ones come from the winning strategies of the quantum to classical graph homomorphism game. So, and similarly, even for the other games that I briefly mentioned earlier, you can show certain equivalences, at least with Stalky's version of homomorphism, in the special case when there is no entanglement. And in some other cases where you allow entanglement, it may or may not be equivalent, or it is sometimes a one-way implication. And then I want to end with saying that in particular when there is an isomorphism game, which is similar to the homomorphism game, but now you want the players to convince the verifier that there is an isomorphism between the two graphs. In those cases, depending on the way the game is defined, you have certain strategies. So in some cases, these strategies arise from biunitary matrices, and in certain cases, you get these from certain quantum functions. But in the classical graph isomorphism game, it can be shown that all winning strategies come from certain quantum permutation matrices that intertwine these adjacency matrices. And so similarly, in the case of a quantum graph, you can associate a certain non-commutative permutation matrix, which is a generalization of this usual quantum permutation matrix on a classical set. But now this is a permutation matrix on the quantum set. And it can be shown that winning strategies of these games basically are those non-commutative permutation matrices, and they basically intertwine the associated adjacency operators of these two graphs. So, so in case of isomorphism games, there's a very nice characterization, and many of them coincide under certain identifications and under certain conditions. Okay, so with that, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for the talk. Very nice talk. Just wanted to go in the beginning. So if you have like this classical operator system, if you look at this orthogonal complement, this tells you something about some zero capacity channel. So Shannon zero classical capacity, or you can frame a quantum version of it. So now if you have a quantum graph, is there any analog of those capacities in this new framework?
So in case of the classical confusability graph, like the independence number captures the one-shot zero capacity. And in case of quantum graphs, you can define quantum versions of independence numbers by like looking homomorphisms from a complete graph. And so there is a notion, but I don't know if it translates to some actual capacity of the channel. Maybe somebody else here can actually answer that, whether it is actually the capacity of the quantum channel in some sense.
Is there any definition somewhere that has quantized this Shannon capacity in this framework?
Yeah, maybe I can send you some references.
Okay, great.
So I think in the case of classical graphs, if you're playing non-local games, you can sort of argue that Alice and Bob's Hilbert spaces can be taken to be the same thing. Mm-hmm. Does the same sort of argument go through in yours?
Right, so that's where, so in all of these games, it so happens that the synchronicity condition forces that, yeah, this holds. But it really depends on the way you are defining the synchronicity condition. Yeah. So sometimes the synchronicity forces that the strategy is actually a PVM and not just a POVM. So those things may not hold, but at least the spaces are going to be the same in these games as well.